You're making an entrance as it is. Should we get going? All right, hello everybody. My name is Robert Weissman. I'm president of Public Citizen. Thanks for attending this hour or so long session to talk about what Congress needs to do to deal with the promise and the peril of artificial intelligence now coming piece of Senate leaders' roadmap, the working group roadmap on what to do about AI. We're going to have a panel discussion and a fireside chat, but first we are going to kick it off with some remarks from Senator Cory Booker. Just a couple comments about Senator Booker before I let him take the mic. First, some of you will know, but some of you will be too young to know that before he was a senator, he was mayor of Newark and got famous nationally as an early adopter of Twitter. And it wasn't just that he was a clever personality, which he was. It was that he was innovating ways for technology to be used to break down the barrier between people and government officials and to figure out how technology could be used to advance, not undermine, democracy. So he brings some deep practical experience in this space. The second thing to say about Senator Booker is that, I think he'll say it, he's a techie, a nerdy guy, and he knows this stuff. So when he gives remarks to us, it comes from a place of deep knowledge about AI issues and technology issues in the context of understanding about civil rights, democracy, and justice. So we appreciate that work. The third is that as we talk about what needs to be done, I've been given something of a blank slate by the Senate roadmap today. Senator Booker has one of the very important things that do need to be done, the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which we're going to hear about and talk about in the course of today. And the last thing to say is Senator Booker is known for his joke telling, and I threatened to fill the space if you were late with AI dad jokes, which I'm not going to do, but I'm going to gift to you a list of 100 of these jokes up for you. And if I've highlighted a couple, if you want to read them randomly, that's on you.
I appreciate that. I mean, you can't just give me a whole list of dad jokes and not expect me to, look for the highlighted ones here. But first of all, I'm really happy to see everybody. There's a lot going on right now, obviously, in this space. We did not know that this was going to coordinate so seamlessly with what the leader and others released today. What do you call a chat GPT that's been trained on too much data? A conspiracy theorist. I mean, that's so bad. That's the one you highlighted? Okay, I'm going to hold these for later. But thank you for that overly generous introduction. Really, my job is to say as few words as possible and get out of my way because we have an extraordinary panel. Obviously, a superstar from Public Citizens. I'm so excited that the AFL-CIO Tech Institute's represented here, National Nurses United, the AI Now Institute, GW Law, Mozilla, and White House staff who oversaw the development of Biden's really landmark AI Bill of Rights. It gave us a lot of hope. These leaders and thought leaders in many ways have been essential to promote AI policies that really do intend to serve the greater public interest and ideals that we share. They're really looking to leverage the upside, be very tech positive, but also make sure that AI doesn't erode workers' rights, erode privacy, enable election interference, or push biases and discrimination. I mean, that's really what the call of the moment is. And what I hope that folks here feel like, being in a room like this, I really hope you have that feeling that we are at the foothills of a towering Mount Everest of change that is coming not just to America, but to civilization. I really hope that that makes you crackle a bit with excitement. What's going to happen in the next decade in humanity is going to be this unbelievable transition to a new era, and we are seeing the foothills of that. I remember the early days, as you were saying, of just social media. And I couldn't even get my mind around the changes that were going to happen. And I knew I couldn't anticipate the transformative impact it was going to have on society. And government did virtually nothing. Nothing to protect against the ills, nothing to create sort of standards and guidelines. And what has happened is transformative. It destroyed newspapers and destroyed parts of media that people had relied on all the time. It made people have unfortunate impacts on their sense of self and their self-concept, ways that we're just beginning to understand. But also on the flip side, it did some pretty transformative things. It allowed people to disintermediate traditional media and actually begin to garner a voice that often had been excluded from the conversation. I can go on and on about just social media itself, what makes me excited, and also what makes me quite literally sit up at night with worry as I doom scroll and see its impact on a guy in his 50s, not to mention what it's probably doing to many kids. And so I'm frustrated with the promise of social media not fully being realized and the promise of social media, frankly, having such negative impacts on our world. And I think about that in context of AI. And so my hope is that the momentum we seem to have in the Senate of doing something, that we can guide that and land that in a positive way. And to be a part of the architect of how our government responds to this moment is exciting. I just know from my own staff to see folks that are young, that are in their 20s, and how old are you? Are you 50 yet? I've seen gray happen. I've seen thinning of the hair. But to see really staffers with principals that may not grasp a lot of these issues, this is a chance for staffs to make an impact in a way that generations perhaps yet unborn will be affected by. And I am concerned, and you've heard some of my concerns already, protecting workers, that we do enough to enhance and strengthen our democracy as opposed to leave it vulnerable like social media has towards people that have insidious desires. I'm really worried about what's happened in my lifetime. My parents saw this era that secured certain rights, that closed the black-white wealth gap, and I've seen an era that many of those rights are being reversed or the black-white wealth gap grow. Can we make sure that we keep the best ideals of civil rights and shared democratic benefits really in the center and not just an afterthought or thoughts of we should have done something? I don't believe in cynicism. I don't believe in surrendering to cynicism. I don't believe that fears of the future should freeze us. It should command the best of who we are to think that we can actually help to predict the future by making it happen. This is the most exciting moment, I think, for humanity since some of the inventions of like the computer. I think that the possibilities are tremendous. And I know for a fact that people in this room, from staffers to outside advocates, that we actually have this moment to define the future, to make a greater future happen, and to protect people and affirm the best of who we are and the ideals of democracy. And so I'm, again, going to do what I said, get the hell out of the way, because we do have an extraordinary panel. It's not my job to introduce that panel, is it? No. Good. Lots of heads shaking. Cory, get the hell out of the way. I wish I could end with a great dad joke right now. It would be perfect if somebody had given me material. Should I go? I'm going to go to the well one more time, but there's nothing highlighted in this. Oh, here it is. Why was the AI bad at stand-up comedy? Oh, this is because their jokes were too predictable. All right, let me get out of the way. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Senator Booker. And I've never gotten so close to being able to ask Senator Booker what his favorite bakery on Ferry Street in Newark is. So I don't know if you'd give us that honor of telling us. Oh, of course, I should have known that. Thank you so much. My name's Justin Hendricks. I run a site called Tech Policy Press, and I'm very grateful to be here today. I'm going to invite my panelists up to join me now. And if you all just come and take the stage, Robert Weissman from Public Citizen, who you've already met, Ann McCack from AI Now Institute, Spencer Overton from GW Law, Hannah Baumann from National Nurses United, and Arohi Patak from AFL-CIO. And everyone will just since we've all now sat in a various order, just remind the audience who you are when you speak, so that they'll be able to make it out. And I understand that this report that Senator Booker and Rob Weissman mentioned has just come out this morning. So I'm not sure everyone on the panel has read it closely, may not necessarily want to remark directly on it or its contents. So some folks, I'm sure, on the panel will be sharing general thoughts in response to the questions that I'll put forward, and some folks may wish to respond to certain elements of the report and what they've learned from it as we go along. But we're meant to kind of talk a little bit about the sort of civil society perspective on some of the questions that were just broadly framed by the senator. And I think in particular to talk about the ways in which we can be sure that AI development ultimately benefits society, benefits the public interest. And so I think I do want to start there, and we're going to kind of come down the line and give everyone a chance to sort of get in on this first question, which is, if you were not here today representing your organization, but one of the staffers or perhaps lawmakers at work in the rooms and offices behind us, what would be the immediate policy action that you'd want to see take place to be certain that we can take advantage of artificial intelligence while mitigating the many, many risks that we face from it, not to mention just terrible jokes that apparently come out, which, Rob, you provided us. I'm sure those came mostly from ChatGPT. For your sins, we'll let you take the first crack at a response to that question.
I'm passing the opportunity to continue the comedy show. I think the number one overarching question is this wildly powerful technology. Is it going to be the domain and exclusive control of a handful of large corporations, or is society going to set boundaries and guardrails and ensure that the technology is used to advance the public interest rather than just enable the concentration of wealth and power? And there's literally dozens of ways that gets played out. To highlight three quick things without any detail that I think need to be focused on. One is dealing with the immediate issue of elections and the possibility of deepfakes undermining our elections. Senate Rules Committee today moved forward legislation that is bipartisan to do that, and it's vital that Congress act on that issue this year. Two is to deal with this fundamental issue, which has been with us for quite some time in the AI space, which is the built-in problems of racial and other kinds of bias. That has to both do with the algorithmic decision-making that's the subject of Senator Booker's bill, but it's pervasive, whether it's facial recognition or the deployment of military technologies that are going to replicate racial bias and other forms of bias unless they intentionally are designed not to do it. And a third thing, which is kind of like almost a footnote in this report, but is a gigantic threat, is that the U.S. military is on the precipice of engaging in autonomous weapons arms race with China, which is insane, avoidable, and should be ended now before it starts by the U.S. Congress.
Thank you, Rob. Spencer, we'll come to you next. And you've written about some of these questions recently, AI and bias, AI and democracy. What would make your list of immediate policy actions?
American innovation, of course, is important, but so are legal guardrails. The innovation of the cotton gin led to incredible economic growth. Over half of our exports, banks, shipping lines, textiles, right? But it also led to the expansion of race-based slavery and issues that are with us today. Industrial revolution, same thing, and we're dealing with climate right now. Yeah, we want the benefits of AI, but it's not kind of mutually exclusive. We got to deal with these potential harms. I'll talk about bias a little bit later, but in the context of democracy, policy should mitigate disinformation and polarization, obviously, so that's the deepfake issue. But even though deepfakes receive the bulk of popular attention, AI poses significant challenges to all aspects of our election system. So we need data privacy rules to prevent companies from using AI to psychologically manipulate voters without them even knowing it. We need policies that require AI developers and deployers to constantly anticipate and mitigate harms like AI-powered cyber attacks on local election offices or nuisance spam flooding here of FOIA requests of local election offices. Also, if we don't step up to ensure all people have access to these tools, the economic and digital divides of AI will be replicated in our politics. Those communities with access to tools will have even more power, and those without access will have even less of a voice. This bias issue is incredibly important. I want to hear from some other people, though, because I want to rail on that a little bit here.
Excellent. And what we've got, our next two respondents here can bring us maybe a perspective on the immediate policy actions from a workers' rights perspective. So, Rohi, what about you?
Sure. So to begin with, it's clear to everyone here that American workers are the engine of our economy, but for too long they've been sidelined from our economy entirely, while corporations have reaped record profits on the backs of the very same workers. So when we think about policy solutions, I want to actually workers are the true experts of their jobs. They know what works, they know what doesn't work, they know which technology is going to be augmentative, which is going to be helpful, and which is going to be harmful. So the two policy solutions I want to focus on, the first one is giving workers the right to organize and collectively bargain for better employment standards, for better workplace conditions, and for many in this room, this might actually be something that is news to you, but collective bargaining rights are actually the single most effective way for us as a society to protect workers and to ensure positive outcomes in workplaces, which then trickles down to consumers, to society at large. The second policy piece I want to mention is centering workers in the workers and worker voice and experience in the design, development, deployment, and continued evaluation of all workplace technology. This, again, because workers are the experts at what they do, they really have a good sense for what is going to work rather than relying on a third-party vendor or a developer of technology to come to a manager or a boss of a company and say, this is going to work great and save you millions of dollars without actually even having any understanding of how this process, this technology, the system could work in a workplace and with the workers that are already doing this work day to day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Hannah.
And Hannah, you are, in a healthcare context, clearly one of the places where automation, artificial intelligence is already, well deployed and very much affecting the nurses that you represent.
Yes, absolutely. National Nurses United is the largest union and professional association of registered nurses in the country. So if and when you and your loved ones end up in the hospital, there will be a registered nurse at your bedside caring for you. And I just want to echo this point that AI is already widely deployed in hospital settings. And we actually just today released some survey results. This is a survey of about 2,300 of our members in hospitals across the country. And actually 60% of those respondents, so these registered nurse respondents, disagreed with the statement, I trust my employer will implement AI with patient safety as the first priority. In the hospital, the nurse's job is to be the patient advocate, and that is where all of our policy recommendations come from. So NNU believes that we need to start from the fundamental public health principle known as the precautionary principle. This is the idea that if there is not a scientific consensus that a specific action or policy or tool is not harmful, then that action should not be implemented. So if we cannot prove that AI is safe, effective, and equitable, then it should not be tested on humans. Patients and the people who care for them are not guinea pigs, and nurses are unwilling to sacrifice any human life on the altar of innovation. So that is something that we hold very dearly. And so our union is demanding that the federal government issues AI regulations that are grounded in that precautionary principle. Tech companies and healthcare employers should be required to prove that AI systems are safe, effective, and equitable before these technologies are deployed in healthcare settings. And that is not what is happening right now.
Emma, you have been busy on Capitol Hill. I've seen you in rooms like this one quite a lot frequently, at least a couple times in the fall, I think. What would be your immediate policy action proposals?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I'm glad that Senator Booker started us off with sort of looking back at social media in the last decade of what we've seen in terms of consolidation in the tech industry and in the social media landscape, because I think it is a moment of possibility and it is a moment of newness, but equally it is a moment of continuity. And there's a lot to learn from the last decade, and there's also already a toolkit. And I think in this moment of like where there's a very well-funded campaign that it keeps emphasizing that every time there's a new, there's a GPT-4, we should be going back to the drawing board on regulation. That is only serving to kind of make sure that as civil society, we're, pushing the same ball up the same hill. So what I would draw attention to in the kind of what do we need to do now is to really draw from the last decade of, I think someone tabulated over 50 legislative proposals across areas that you mentioned at the start, but I can maybe say a little bit on privacy and competition in particular, because that's where we have a fairly mature toolkit. On privacy, America stands apart in terms of being one of the few countries in the world. 130 countries have privacy laws, and America is the exception today. I think we need not just a privacy law, but we need one with strong data minimization. I think data minimization also needs more specific rules. So Senator Booker was one of the sponsors, among others, and civil society partners like Accountable Tech and Epic that supported a rule to ban surveillance advertising. I think we need to push the needle towards bold proposals that really get at the heart of the surveillance engine that is fueling the consolidation of power and wealth and capital within very few companies. On the competition front, and I'll note that while the report names very many issues, it's notably silent on competition. And I think there too, we have a pretty well-honed toolkit, everything from prohibiting discrimination by gatekeepers to really, I think, a rule, for example, that separates the ownership and control of the infrastructure from other related AI markets is long overdue. We're at the point where we can in real time see the way in which AI infrastructure cloud providers are essentially consolidating their advantage to control and to kind of control the AI market. And maybe the final thing, this is an enforcement point, but is also one that could receive kind of legislative strengthening, is on strong merger control and strategic partnerships in the competition toolkit. So I think if I had to make one short point to end this, it would be to say there's a lot to do, but there's also just a lot of groundwork that's already in place. It's a sort of a moment to act.
So not necessarily all new legislative proposals, such as those put forward today in the report, but maybe go back to some of the things that didn't make it through in the last bit.
I don't know that I read too many legislative proposals in today's report. Maybe I got that wrong. I read a lot of send this to committee to consider, but yes, I agree in spirit.
So let's come back to the question of bias and important features of regulation that you think would address bias. And I'll start, Rob, with you. You start talking about corporate power and the fact that AI really is, potentially gasoline on the fire of big corporate power. How do we avoid bias in AI systems that are deployed across corporate America?
Well, I think to Amba's point, this is one thing that we know quite a bit about already, both because we've got a long history of racism and racial discrimination in the United States, but particularly when it comes to the use of algorithms. They didn't pop up in the last couple months. And what we've learned collectively, and Deb and others have been some of the people who've best displayed this, is that systems that aren't designed intentionally to offset social inequity will replicate that. And so if you use systems to make decisions, whether it's to who you're going to hire for a job, or making housing decisions, or credit decisions, or criminal justice decisions, if they're not intentionally designed not to promote racial bias, they will, because it's so deeply embedded in society. So we need legislation that requires that the systems be tested and affirmatively shown not to perpetrate that harm. That's one, and that's sort of the core piece of Senator Booker's bill as well as others. But I think it's not just in that space, and it's not just racial bias, although I would forefront that. The systems themselves represent all kinds of biases, and sometimes they're intentional biases. Like, how can we segment markets to rip off consumers better? And we don't have to live in a world where corporations are empowered to figure out how they can charge the most from each individual person. We don't have to live in a world where corporations are permitted to play on our own biases of relying and believing in the humanness and the truthfulness and the authority of computers to be manipulated by corporations. That's a social bias we all have. And we need rules to protect all of us against being victimized by that kind of social bias. And then I think the last thing to say is there are some technologies that are inherently going to exhibit bias or are inherently problematic, some applications of AI that shouldn't be permitted. I'd say facial recognition is at the top of that list. There may be some very restrictive uses where it makes sense, but by and large, it's a technology that has built-in racial bias, built-in privacy invasions, and doesn't really do anything to advance social interests, well, although it might advance the interests of corporations and the developers. And we don't have to, as a society, say we're going to permit these things. We should say, using the precautionary principle, if we can anticipate they're going to do more harm than good, they should not be permitted to be deployed in the marketplace.
Spencer.
Yeah. You know, we're familiar with AI bias in criminal justice, employment, and lending. It's also a big issue in terms of democracy. And you mentioned the piece, it's overcoming racial harms to democracy from AI. It's at SSRN. If you just do Spencer Overton and SSRN, the whole article is there. AI bias in language translation tools, election information chatbots, content moderation tools, deepfake detection tools, other machine learning applications can deceive, disenfranchise voters, alter election outcomes, and reproduce inequality here. You all know that, AI-powered Facebook content moderation tools could, fail to remove 70% of Spanish misinformation, but only missed 29% of misinformation in English. California Voting Rights Act requires it to provide election materials in both Spanish and English, and it's got a chat bot that can answer some questions in English that it cannot answer in Spanish. It's an issue in terms of democracy. Now, in terms of this report that came out today, women make up over half of our population. Folks of color, it's increasing. That'll be the case in about a generation. And the report today inadequately deals with the elephant in the room, bias in AI. Because foundation models are optimized to reflect their training data, like you said, and detect patterns, we should expect them to reinforce stereotypes. And AI in too many situations automates discrimination here, effectively acting as a discrimination machine. Despite this fact, the 30-page report today used the word innovation 28 times. It used the word bias 3 times, and 2 of those were in the appendix. So only 1 time in the basis of the report. It really felt like it's the beginning of the 1900s, and we're at some blue and gray reconciliation reunion that basically keeps Jim Crow off the agenda because mentioning it would be too divisive here, right? The report's legalistic and weak language on bias signals to industry that the Senate thinks that deepfake ads against sitting politicians represent a bigger problem than AI bias that deprives millions of Americans of fair housing, employment, and lending opportunities.
Thank you, Spencer. And I'll come to our two representatives from labor individually, but maybe picking up on that a little bit. The promise of folks like Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, in rooms like this one in recent months has been abundance, right? We're going to have perpetual abundance. He was going on this week about universal basic income. Now he wants to provide universal basic compute, right? We'll all share in the great wealth of artificial intelligence. So I'd ask you, you've talked about job displacement, wage inequality. What does abundance look like to you in the AI future?
Well, I think, so technology by itself is not necessarily good or bad. It's how technology is used, it's how it's manipulated that can either be helpful or it can be harmful. I think what we've seen since AI has been running rampant over our society, our communities, our economy over the last however many years that it's really started to kind of ratchet up. Too often, corporations will use AI in a way that is exploitive, and they'll do it to maximize their profits. And so, why do we live in a society where corporations are allowed to make the rules and everyone else is okay with that? And so when I think about abundance, I think about an economy that works for everyone, that actually has workers, again, the engine of our economy, who are able to live lives that are meaningful, are able to work one job with good paying wages and benefits, are able to save up for whatever their future might be, retirement, starting a business, getting a higher education, degree, etc. I think the question about abundance is one that really, I think maybe puts some light on where our morals are, and it feels like our moral compass is maybe skewed in the wrong direction. I do want to say, look, AI is technology. Wait, let me rephrase that. The AFL-CIO and Tech Institute is not anti-tech. We're just pro-worker. We believe that we believe that technology can actually do a lot of good. It can replace and automate repetitive tasks. It can augment work in many ways. It can help you, take some of the really minor kind of, mundane pieces of your work and like automate them and allow you to kind of focus on higher responsibilities. And all of those are good things. What we should be doing as a society is thinking about how we maximize everything that is good about AI and workplace technology, and think about how we then put guardrails on everything that is bad. And so I think it is important for us to have that balance. And I think if we work towards a system where everyone is able to benefit, I think it's only going to be beneficial for our economy, for our competitive advantage. It's going to make us happier. I think everyone in this country is probably, or let me rephrase that. I think Americans, by and large, are not as happy as they should be, and this might be a way to make people happier if we just right-size our economy.
Hannah.
Yeah, I want to say, nurses embrace and regularly master worker-centric technologies that complement bedside care and our professional practice. But we're very concerned about technologies that are being implemented into hospital and care settings that don't do that. So a lot of these, actually lead towards harm towards our patients and harm to our workforce. Sure, there might be a role for AI in reading MRIs or in pharmaceutical development, but when it comes to the hands-on care of nursing, that work should not and cannot be automated, even though healthcare corporations are trying desperately to make that happen. Nurses, as I said before, are the patient advocates in the hospital, the people who truly have a stake in caring for you and providing the best possible care to your loved ones. And I think, an example that I can share from this is, we heard 10 years ago, when electronic health records were being rolled out, we heard the same arguments that we're hearing now, that electronic health records are going to make it so that nurses and clinicians in the hospital can spend more time with their patients, right? They're not going to be staring into a notebook, scribbling notes. They're going to be looking you in the eyes and spending more than 5 minutes with you at a time. And if anything has come true, it's been the opposite of that. Nurses now spend more time than ever before charting in front of a computer, entering in data. And people are saying the same thing now with AI. They're saying, oh, well, these digital scribes are going to make it so that healthcare providers can spend more time with their patients. And we just have yet to see that be the case. And so nurses are really concerned about this rhetoric of abundance and how AI is going to cure cancer and solve all these problems when our direct experience in the hospital shows otherwise.
But we've got 2 minutes left on this panel, which gives you, I think, the last word.
Okay, great.
You can either address this one, or I was, going to ask you about whether you were pleased to see that the Senate declined to try to define artificial general intelligence in its report today.
Let me go with a broader comment, because I could make some snarky jokes about that one, but maybe that wouldn't be the best use of my 2 minutes. I actually wanted to go back to something that Arohi talked about, which is this kind of binary of pro and anti-tech. Another one that never seems to go away is innovation versus regulation. And I do want to point out that these are binaries that are designed to put those that are raising concerns about how these technologies impact society in a corner. They're trying to label the, people like us as sort of critics and therefore minimize the argument we're making, which is anything but negative. It's about how are we shaping innovation to line up with public interest and public interest over the interest of very few companies, like a lot of us have said. And I think the other thing to say is maybe that really this is a conversation about power. So not just who has a seat at the table, as we've seen over the last nine months of Insight Forums, but also more broadly, right? There might be times when folks, including many of us, have seats at the table, but really it's a question of whose interests are being listened to, who is being heard, and who's sort of setting the agenda right now. And I think, I'm disappointed to say, I hope this changes, but I think right now the driver's seat is very much still industry in terms of the policy agenda and also in terms of the broader public discourse.
Well, I thank you all for helping us to try to reset or perhaps change the direction of that agenda with your comments, participation on this panel today. I thank the organizers for putting this together, our audience for listening, and I believe it's my duty to welcome Nicole Gill from Accountable Tech next. Thank you all.
All right, we're going to do a little staging while we introduce our next panel. I'm Nicole Gill. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Accountable Tech, and we're so pleased that all of you are here today to listen from civil society for our perspective on AI. We're next going to have a conversation with Deb Raji, moderated by Ami Fields-Meyer. Deb is currently a research fellow at UC Berkeley and Mozilla, and previously worked at Google's ethical AI team, the Partnership on AI, and the AI Now Institute, just to name a few. Deb's research focuses on algorithmic auditing and evaluation, something she became especially interested in after discovering a content moderation model she was training to filter out explicit images was disproportionately flagging content containing people of color that was not explicit. She realized that the data the model was being trained on lacked diversity, and the product was reflecting it. And I believe the startup you were working for did nothing to change that at the time. That was 2017, so. Ami was most recently senior policy advisor to Vice President Kamala Harris, and before that, chief of staff at the Office of Science and Tech Policy, where he helped oversee the development and the release of the first ever AI blueprint. Welcome them to the stage.
Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Nicole, for that introduction, and to Senator Booker, Public Citizen, everybody else who is here with us. We only have a few minutes here, so I want to dive right in, and I'm hoping, Deb, that we can start with the people. We have these enormously abstract conversations about policy, and this last conversation was a good example of drilling down into some specifics. But like many of us, I come to this conversation in part because, for example, I have an adult brother who has autism and who relies on public benefits. And we see the way that AI and algorithmic tools are mediating the way that people, vulnerable people, are accessing services. So why don't we start just from your experience and from what you see, who are the people who are most vulnerable in this discussion? And let's start there.
Yeah, actually a conversation we had. Oh, also, I'm not sure if everyone can hear me. I'm on the shorter side. But yeah, when we were having a conversation earlier, it reminded me that one of the most valuable experiences I had in my research journey was actually, so a lot of my early work in auditing was working with Joy Buolamwini at the Algorithmic Justice League and auditing facial recognition, commercial facial recognition products. And these were tools that were on the market that were being pitched for use in immigration, by law enforcement. And we had identified that a lot of these technologies did not function very well for darker skinned faces and especially darker skinned women. And one of the most meaningful experiences I had was actually talking to Fabian Rogers, who was a tenant at a rent-controlled building where the landlord had installed facial recognition in that building. And the tenants in that building were majority Black residents, and they had felt like the technology was not working for them. And I had, I had gone to Vanessa Dumplings with him, and we had talked like for an entire Saturday. And that was really my first interaction with someone that was impacted by this technology, and he was part of his tenant association fighting the landlord's use of facial recognition in his building. But the way that he talked about the technology was very different from how we talk about it in this room. You know, he wasn't necessarily using words like privacy or concerned around encryption or bias. He wasn't even using those terms, but just speaking in terms of this is technology that we know was not deployed for our benefit. This was not something that was installed for our protection or our use. And so I feel like a lot of the grounded stories that we encounter come from that perspective. I love the experiences that Hannah shared of just being a nurse and actually on the ground witnessing what was happening and having that contrast of her experience versus the narratives these companies are coming in with. I think that happens a lot when people interact with those that are impacted. I think another thing that I learned talking to Fabian, and I've begun to learn also interacting with a lot of the unions, I feel, the workers are just directly interacting with these systems, and you guys share those experiences in a way that I think others haven't have as much direct experience with, is there's an urgency when you start interacting with the impacted population. So in the case of Fabian, spending his personal time to organize against the use of facial recognition in his building because it impacted him directly. A lot of the practical wins we've seen in terms of, AI litigation. One of the first litigation cases, AI Now actually had a litigating algorithms event about this, was Daniel Santos, which was a teacher working with a union to fight against the use of facial recognition in his personal assessment at his job. And so I think that there's a lot of these interesting stories we see as this technology starts getting deployed of how it's actually impacting people meaningfully. To sort of transition to this new era of ChatGPT, it's been interesting. Like, I've interacted with a lot of hospitals that are very quick to pilot, ChatGPT, like products, and this is not like a myth or a story. These are things that are happening. And so interacting with patients, interacting with the nurses that are on the ground is going to be super critical to figuring out how to move forward.
So I want to take advantage of your technical expertise in this conversation. Clearly, the context now for this discussion is that as of this morning, the AI legislative train has left the station. And
has it?
I'll leave that to others.
We'll find out.
To weigh in on, but certainly we seem to be headed in a
we've marked a destination.
Sure,
yeah.
Pick your metaphor. One experience I had when I was working at the White House on AI issues and specifically on issues of algorithmic discrimination and the societal issues that many of our last panelists brought up was that we would hear from folks from companies and elsewhere who would say, we're totally concerned about the issues that you've just described. We just don't have the technical skills. We don't have the technical mitigations that would allow us to actually do something about this. So we're going to put out the tools and we'll sort of figure it out.
Yeah.
Help us understand from your research leadership and your perch, what would you say to staffers and to members of Congress about what we need to be investing in order to mitigate against the harms that you just described?
Yeah, so to go back to my earlier comment of, when these things actually get deployed and released into the wild, real people are impacted and in serious ways. So I'm thinking of like Devon Jackson that was impacted by tenant screening tools that kept him out of, rent-controlled housing, or, Tammy Dobbs, who was sort of had her benefits cut. And these are things that impact them for a year, 2 years, 3 years. A lifetime. And so given that, I think one sort of very because I think sometimes people critique the idea of third-party evaluations or tools focused on limitations of the current scope of technologies, because they say, they're going to come up with a better version of this technology. And I think that's possible. But the reality is that a lot of the ecosystem, this AI industry, is full of technology that doesn't work or doesn't behave in ways that we can anticipate, or ways that we have yet to fully understand. And as a result of those failures, real lives are being impacted. And so a lot of what me and my colleagues have started looking into has been, one, what does it mean to actually push back against some of this corporate marketing rhetoric, which doesn't actually get a lot of pushback, even in policy spaces, when the companies make claims around the technology's functionality, even to public customers. So this is like, imagine a state making purchase of an AI risk assessment for Medicaid, distribution or Medicaid eligibility detection. They don't really have the tools available for them to independently critique that technology or understand how well that technology works, independent of what the vendor's claims are as part of their procurement process. So anything that is even an educational resource for them goes a long way. And in particular, I've been working with a group at Mozilla where we've been thinking about this idea of open source audit tooling projects. So effectively, to Amba's last point, where there's so much about innovation in this space, and it's put in opposition to this notion of regulation. But regulation historically has required quite a bit of innovation. There's a lot of unknowns in terms of how to evaluate these technologies, what infrastructure we need in order to allow for the transparency that we're asking for, to allow for the harms discovery if we want to monitor these systems, allow for incidents to be reported. That's technical infrastructure that has to be built, institutional infrastructure and capacity that has to be built, and that requires investment. Which we don't currently see. And so I think a lot of my current stance has been, given the reality of the industry right now, where we have a lot of these sort of snake oil products on the market, and those products are causing a disproportionate amount of harm for those that are impacted, that happen to be the most vulnerable, what are the things that we can build, whether it's infrastructure, technical infrastructure, or institutional capacity, to push back against some of these claims of performance that these companies are putting out, to sort of, force them to either, give access to their data in ways that are, mediated either through technology or through, institutional actors, to allow for harms reporting or harms discovery. So allowing people to be aware of when an AI system is part of a decision that impacts them, and allow them to report to an entity that can take action on their concerns. And then also, how do we communicate some of these findings? So, right now, you have academic researchers doing some of this work, and they are not sure how to communicate or what channels are available for them to even report those findings. And so thinking through some of these things really pragmatically, and investing in that as another type of innovation, as a sort of safety innovation angle, I think is something that I've been really passionate about for the last couple months.
So we only have, I think we have time for one more question here. And so I want to take what you've just said and sort of zoom out to American leadership on the global stage. One way of thinking about today's legislative framework and the work that's been going on in Congress and the White House is to think about what interaction it will have with other legislative discussions happening across the globe. Obviously, different economies in different countries have different motivations and competitive advantages. But when you are engaged with your colleagues researchers, civil society, civil rights advocates, et cetera, human rights advocates around the world. What are you hearing about the positionality that they are hoping that the United States will have? What gaps as we begin to legislate on AI, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
As we begin to legislate on AI?
So just to say something about that, I think there's been a lot of talk in the U.S. about legislation. Amba kind of called this out a little bit, where there hasn't actually been a lot there's been nothing that's passed, actually. And the U.S. is almost unique in that. In the EU, they have the EU AI Act, but they also have a history of, data protection. I'm not here to endorse, foreign entities, but I'm saying, there has been movement, in these other environments, even in the UK, in ways that we haven't seen in the U.S. Like the first state bill passed in Colorado, AI state bill passed, like a couple weeks ago. And that's the first one. And there's been so much, there's 40 bill drafts, in California. California loves to talk about regulating AI, but has yet to actually pass anything. And so I think that is a really important point where, we do kind of unfortunately stand out in that way as, the nation that loves to talk about AI, but has yet to take action on it. I think that also manifests in the disparities in terms of investment. So if you look at the Canadian AI Safety Institute, the Canadian government committed $50 million Canadian, to the AI Safety Institute there. The UK AI Safety Institute has a £100 million commitment. And NIST, which is sort of the driving force of the executive order and is meant to operate as our US AI Safety Institute, after sort of a public shaming campaign, finally got a commitment of $10 million. And so you can already see sort of, in terms of actions, we're very sparse on it. And I will call out the US for that. On the other hand, though, in global conversations, I've noticed how, interventions by, Vice President Kamala Harris, for example, at the UK AI Safety Summit, shifted the conversation in a more grounded direction in a way that I don't think would have happened otherwise. So because the U.S. is such an integral global player, people pay attention to the U.S.'s position on various topics. And so when people discuss even at a high level in terms of principles or guidelines or frameworks at the U.S., in the U.S., that does shift the conversation globally. At the UK AI Safety Summit, for example, the UK at that time was very focused on more abstract, speculative, long-term risks. Vice President Kamala Harris gave a very compelling speech that same week in the UK. Well-timed, well done, Ami and the entire staff there. And so as a result of that, that completely shifted the tone of the Bletchley declaration that came out of that summit. And the UK entities that were working on AI topics paid attention to the fact that Kamala Harris had mentioned bias, had mentioned civil society, invited those folks into the room for the first time in that process. And so there's a lot of opportunity for impact, even though we haven't necessarily followed through completely on that promise. And so I'm excited to sort of see how we continue to play that leadership role. And I really hope we don't miss this opportunity to be the first to act in really meaningful ways.
Thanks. Please join me in thanking Deb Raji.
Thank you.
Ami, Deb, thanks so much for that conversation. I hope we just witnessed the debut podcast. I would tune in weekly. I don't think we necessarily need more podcasts, but I'll make an exception for that one. I just want to thank everyone who made time for this, all the participants who took time out of their busy day, especially today, as you all have been engaging so much on AI and leading up to this moment. Rob Weissman, Public Citizen, for hosting the event. Accountable Tech for helping facilitate a lot of the live streaming of the event. Amba from AI Now Institute. Arohi, AFL-CIO Tech Institute. Spencer Overton, GW Law. Hannah Bowman, National Nurses United. Deb with Mozilla, Justin, Tech Policy Press, maybe that can be the host of the podcast, and Ami, who just recently departed the White House. Thanks so much for coming out here today and for everyone who tuned in to the live stream. We'll be hanging out in the room for the next 20 minutes if folks have any follow-up questions for speakers who are able to stay. Thank you.